Something important is happening right now, and before you dismiss that feeling in your chest, before you convince yourself that this is just another message passing through your awareness, I want you to pay attention. There are moments in life that seem ordinary on the surface, yet beneath them something far greater is quietly arranging itself. This is one of those moments. The fact that you are here, reading these words at this exact point in your journey, is connected to a deeper unfolding that has been building for much longer than you realize. What is approaching around June 22nd carries a significance that reaches beyond a simple date, beyond a seasonal transition, beyond the movement of celestial energy. It marks a crossing point, a sacred marker on a path your soul has been traveling for a very long time. Long before you had language for what you were experiencing, long before you understood why certain events kept repeating, why certain lessons kept repeating, something was guiding you toward this very threshold. Chosen one, there is a reason your attention was drawn here. There is a reason these words feel strangely familiar, as if some hidden part of you already knew they were coming. The deeper truth is that what you have endured was never meaningless. Every disappointment that left you questioning your direction, every period of waiting that felt unfair, every moment you wondered whether anyone truly saw your effort was serving a purpose that could only be understood from a higher perspective. What appeared to be delay was actually preparation. What felt like rejection was often redirection. What seemed like abandonment was frequently protection from paths that were never aligned with your future. Take a moment and reflect on how much you have carried recently. Think about the emotional heaviness that arrived without warning. Think about the uncertainty that clouded decisions that once felt simple. Think about the old memories, the old wounds, the old fears that suddenly resurfaced despite your belief that you had already moved beyond them. Many people experience these moments and assume something has gone wrong. They interpret discomfort as a sign of failure. They mistake inner turbulence for evidence that they are losing their way. Yet what if the opposite has been true? What if everything that surfaced was appearing because it could no longer remain hidden? The energy surrounding the solstice does more than illuminate what is visible. It shines directly into the corners of your inner world that have been avoided, ignored, or postponed. It reveals what still requires acknowledgement. It brings unfinished emotional chapters back into awareness, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because there are certain doors that cannot open while you continue carrying versions of yourself that no longer belong to your future. This is why the pressure intensified. This is why the silence sometimes felt overwhelming. This is why your doubts seemed louder than usual. As alignment approaches, resistance often becomes more noticeable. The closer you move toward a breakthrough, the more every unresolved fear attempts to convince you to turn back. Yet there was a moment recently when everything inside you wanted to surrender. You know the moment. The point where exhaustion became so heavy that walking away seemed easier than continuing. The point where confusion tempted you to believe that none of your effort mattered. The point where hope felt distant and certainty disappeared entirely. Looking back now, you may recognize that this was not the collapse you feared. It was a rite of passage. It was a turning point, designed to reveal whether you would remain loyal to yourself when external evidence offered no reassurance. The universe often brings people to the edge before revealing what exists beyond it, not because it wishes to see them suffer, but because true transformation requires a choice between abandoning your path and trusting it, a choice between giving up on yourself and remaining present despite uncertainty. And whether you realize it yet or not, you made that choice, perhaps not dramatically, perhaps not with confidence. Perhaps you continued while exhausted, discouraged, and unable to see what was ahead. But you continued. You remained. You refused to completely disconnect from yourself. That quiet act of perseverance became more powerful than you understand. Every unseen battle you survived strengthened something within you. Every moment you chose growth instead of comfort expanded your capacity. Every time you responded with integrity when bitterness would have been easier, you demonstrated a level of readiness that cannot be faked. This has never been about asking for blessings. It has been about becoming the version of yourself capable of receiving them. There has been an evaluation taking place beneath the visible events of your life, not through judgment, but through energetic alignment. Life has been observing who you are becoming through your actions, your resilience, and your willingness to continue evolving even when nobody was applauding your progress. That is why June 22nd carries such weight. It represents more than a single day. It represents a passage between one chapter and another, a moment where energetic pathways begin separating, a moment where internal recalibration creates external consequences, a moment where those who remained committed through uncertainty begin approaching what has been waiting beyond the lessons. Yet the most fascinating part of all is something that many people will overlook completely because they are still asleep to what is actually taking place around them. Most people will crawl through this period without recognizing that anything significant is taking place. They will wake up, follow familiar routines, repeat familiar reactions, and continue living inside the same mental and emotional cycles that have quietly limited their growth for years. They will interpret this moment as ordinary, because they have not trained themselves to notice the deeper currents moving beneath the surface of reality. But your experience is different. The very fact that you have been drawn to this message reveals something important. You are not standing outside this transformation looking in. You are standing within it. Your awareness has already placed you in direct relationship with what is unfolding. And that distinction matters more than most people understand, because awareness changes everything. Awareness creates alignment, and alignment opens pathways that remain invisible to those who are asleep to themselves. This means that what is happening around you is not merely something you witness. It is something you participate in. It is becoming part of your story, part of your evolution, part of a larger unfolding that has been gathering momentum beneath the visible events of your life for far longer than you realize. Many people expect transformation to arrive dramatically. They wait for fireworks, instant miracles, undeniable signs that leave no room for doubt. Yet genuine shifts often begin in far quieter ways. Sometimes the first evidence appears as relief. A heaviness you carried for months suddenly feels lighter. A burden that seemed permanent begins to dissolve without explanation. The constant noise in your mind starts to quiet, allowing a new level of clarity to emerge. Situations that once demanded endless effort begin responding differently. Circumstances that felt blocked begin moving with surprising ease. What once required struggle begins inviting cooperation. You may notice that conversations arrive at exactly the right moment. Encounters seem strangely timed. Opportunities emerge from places that previously offered nothing but silence. It can feel almost as though an unseen intelligence has begun arranging pieces on your behalf. Yet even these external developments are not the greatest gift available to you. The most profound transformation takes place internally. The real blessing is not merely what enters your life. It is who you become as it arrives. After spending so much time searching outside yourself for answers, validation, direction, and reassurance, you begin returning home to your own center. You reconnect with parts of yourself that were buried beneath fear, disappointment, and survival. You rediscover a version of yourself that existed before the world taught you to doubt your worth. That return changes everything, because when harmony is established within, reality begins reflecting it outwardly. The life you have been waiting for does not begin with external circumstances. It begins with inner alignment. This journey was never designed to be simple. If it were easy, it would require no courage. If it demanded nothing, it would transform nothing. The reason this path feels different is because it asks more from those who walk it. It asks for honesty when denial feels safer. It asks for growth when comfort feels easier. It asks for self-awareness when distraction is readily available everywhere. Not everyone chooses that level of responsibility. Not everyone is willing to sit face to face with their own fears, their own limitations, and their own unfinished healing. Yet you have continued moving toward that confrontation, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was exhausting, even when you questioned whether the effort was worth it. There is a reason for that. There is something unique within your soul's design that continuously pushes you beyond what is familiar. It calls you toward expansion. It refuses to allow you to remain confined within smaller versions of yourself. Even during moments when insecurity convinced you that you were insignificant, even during times when you felt invisible or overlooked, there remained something within you that could not be extinguished. A deeper force continued pulling you forward. The universe recognizes that quality. It recognizes the ancient wisdom carried beneath your surface doubts. It recognizes the strength hidden beneath your moments of uncertainty. And now you are approaching a stage where you are being invited to embody that truth more completely than ever before. What makes this stage challenging is that you are standing near the completion of a cycle, and endings have a way of disguising themselves as confusion. The final chapter often feels more difficult than expected because the old reality is dissolving while the new reality has not fully revealed itself. You stand between worlds, unable to return to who you were, yet not fully seeing who you are becoming. It is within this space that doubt makes its final attempt to reclaim authority. Old fears resurface. Familiar insecurities whisper their arguments one last time. The identity you are leaving behind tries to convince you that staying small is safer than stepping forward. Yet this final challenge is not about achieving perfection. It never was. The lesson has always been about remaining present, remaining grounded, remaining connected to yourself even when certainty is unavailable. The question has never been whether you can avoid fear. The question is whether you can continue despite it, whether you can maintain trust while answers remain hidden, whether you can hold your energy steady when external confirmation has not yet arrived. And if you are still here, if you are still listening, if you are still choosing not to abandon yourself despite everything you have faced, then there is something important you must understand. You have already succeeded in ways you may not fully recognize. The breakthrough is no longer something that must be pursued with force. Instead, it begins moving toward you naturally as a consequence of who you have become. Before visible circumstances change, however, another process begins. An internal shift quietly takes root beneath the surface. At first, it may seem subtle. You may struggle to identify exactly what is different. Yet something within you starts reorganizing itself. The emotional weight you once carried loses its grip. Situations that once drained your energy no longer command the same attention. Reactions that once felt automatic begin fading. You find yourself responding differently without consciously trying. These changes may appear small, but they are powerful indicators that alignment is anchoring itself within your being. The universe always reshapes the inner landscape before it reshapes the outer landscape before it reshapes the external environment. What is coming next will not feel unnatural or forced. It will feel strangely familiar, as though you are finally stepping into a current that has been waiting for you all along. This quiet awakening becomes the first unmistakable confirmation that a new doorway has already begun opening. Yet as you continue forward, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Not every connection from your past can accompany you into this next chapter. Some relationships may begin fading despite your efforts to preserve them. Certain conversations may suddenly feel strained where they once felt effortless. People who once reflected your worldview may no longer resonate with the person you are becoming. At first, this can feel painful. It can create confusion and even grief because human beings naturally seek continuity. We want familiar bonds to remain unchanged. We want the people who walked beside us yesterday to continue walking beside us tomorrow. Yet this transition is not evidence of loss. It is evidence of recalibration. The emerging version of yourself requires a different energetic environment than the one that supported your previous identity. The universe is not removing people as a form of punishment. It is creating space for relationships, opportunities, experiences, and connections that match the frequency of who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. The more tightly you cling to what is trying to complete its purpose, the heavier this process feels. But the moment you stop resisting, the moment you trust the intelligence behind the transition, movement returns, flow returns, and what once felt like an ending begins revealing itself as the beginning of something much greater. What exists on the other side of this passage carries a completely different frequency, and the difference will not remain theoretical for long. It will become something tangible, something woven into your daily experience, something that gradually alters the way you think, feel, choose, and respond to life itself. At first, the change may seem difficult to explain. You may find yourself waking up with a sense of certainty that was absent before. Situations that once demanded endless analysis begin feeling remarkably clear. Choices that previously trapped you in cycles of hesitation suddenly reveal an obvious direction forward. Instead of seeking constant reassurance from the outside world, you begin trusting a deeper source of knowing within yourself. That inner certainty becomes one of the clearest signs that something fundamental is shifting. You are no longer navigating solely through confusion, fear, or external validation. You are learning to move from alignment. and alignment changes everything. When your energy becomes coherent, life responds differently. Events that once seemed delayed begin gathering momentum. Opportunities arrive with surprising speed. Circumstances that required months of effort can begin transforming within days and sometimes within moments. Yet there is an important reason this acceleration could not have arrived earlier. Increased alignment creates increased influence. It amplifies the impact of your thoughts, strengthens the momentum behind your intentions, and magnifies the role your awareness plays in shaping your experience. This is why preparation was necessary. This is why the challenges came first. Imagine stepping into a higher level of energetic responsibility without the wisdom required to navigate it. The intensity would have been overwhelming. The lessons you endured were not obstacles standing in the way of your growth. They were the very processes that made growth sustainable. Every disappointment refined your discernment. Every period of uncertainty strengthened your resilience. Every emotional challenge expanded your capacity to hold greater possibilities without being consumed by them. Now, because of what you have learned, you're able to meet this next phase from a completely different level of consciousness. As this transition continues unfolding, communication from the universe may begin appearing with greater frequency, yet it rarely arrives through dramatic announcements. More often, it emerges through subtle patterns that become impossible to ignore. You may glance at a clock and repeatedly encounter the same sequence of numbers. You may receive identical messages from unrelated sources. A phrase spoken by a stranger may mirror something you have been contemplating in private. Certain intuitive feelings may suddenly become stronger, nudging you toward one direction while urging caution around another. Many people dismiss these moments as coincidence because they have been conditioned to trust only what can be logically measured. But when awareness expands, you begin recognizing that reality often communicates through symbols, synchronicities, and intuitive impressions. These experiences are not appearing randomly. They serve as confirmations that your path is moving into greater harmony with something larger than your conscious planning. However, receiving guidance is only part of the process. What matters is your willingness to respond. Awareness alone does not create movement. Insight alone does not create transformation. A message ignored loses its purpose. This stage of your journey asks for active participation. It asks you to pay attention. It asks you to trust what resonates. It asks you to follow the subtle signals that repeatedly appear before you. The more willing you are to listen, the clearer your direction becomes. The more willing you are to trust, the more unmistakable the guidance reveals itself. Yet just when everything seems ready to shift fully into place, another familiar visitor may return. Doubt, not because something has gone wrong, not because you are moving backward, but because you are approaching a level of transformation that threatens the survival of old identities and old patterns. When a chapter is preparing to close, the mind often makes one final attempt to preserve what feels familiar. It may arrive as excessive analysis. It may appear as fear surrounding the unknown. It may disguise itself as logical questions that cause you to second-guess progress you have already made. Suddenly you begin wondering whether you imagined the signs, whether the growth was real, whether the path ahead can truly support the vision forming inside you. Yet this moment deserves careful attention because it is often misunderstood. What you're experiencing is not evidence of failure. It is the final reverberation of an identity that is losing its grip. It is the old version of yourself attempting to maintain relevance, even though its purpose is ending. This is where many people unknowingly stop themselves. They interpret resistance as a warning rather than recognizing it as a confirmation. They assume discomfort means retreat is necessary when, in reality, discomfort often appears because expansion is near. The challenge is not whether fear will appear. The challenge is whether fear will make the decision for you. You are being asked to choose, not between certainty and uncertainty, but between trust and avoidance, between alignment and attachment to what no longer serves your evolution. If you choose trust, even while questions remain unanswered, an entirely new dynamic begins activating within your life. Something powerful happens when you stop trying to force every outcome into existence. Something remarkable occurs when you release the need to control every detail of the journey. Space is created, space for timing greater than your own, space for possibilities beyond what your current perspective can predict, space for alignment to operate without interference. Within that space, Life begins arranging itself differently. The opportunities that belong to you arrive when they are needed. The people meant to assist your growth appear naturally. Situations that once felt impossibly complicated begin untangling themselves with surprising ease. This is not random fortune. It is not coincidence. It is the natural consequence of energetic coherence. When your internal state aligns with your deeper path, reality begins reflecting that harmony back to you. Eventually, there comes a moment when you look behind you and understand why every chapter unfolded exactly as it did. What once felt like delay reveals itself as timing. What once felt like rejection reveals itself as protection. What once felt like confusion reveals itself as preparation. You realize that nothing was truly withheld from you. It was being positioned, refined, organized, brought into alignment with who you are becoming, and the reason the process required patience is because what is arriving carries a significance greater than you originally imagined. The next chapter is not limited to one area of life. Its influence extends across multiple dimensions of your experience simultaneously. It affects the way you think, the way you relate to others, the opportunities available to you, the purpose guiding your decisions, the confidence with which you move through the world, because true transformation is never isolated. It reshapes the entire foundation upon which life is built. The arrival of this reward may not resemble the image you held in your mind. It may come through an unexpected opening, a realization that changes everything, a conversation that redirects your future, a sudden shift that alters the trajectory of your life in ways you could not have predicted. At first, you may overlook its significance because it arrives wearing a different face than the one you anticipated. Yet when you look deeper, when you feel beyond appearances, you will recognize something profound. You will understand that what has arrived is not merely what you desired. It is what your soul required. It is the answer beneath the request, the fulfillment beneath the expectation. And as you continue crossing this threshold, a permanent transformation takes root within you. The habits that once defined your identity begin feeling strangely distant. The emotional patterns that once controlled your decisions lose their influence. The fears that once dictated your choices no longer possess the same authority over your future. And as that realization settles into your awareness, you begin understanding that the person who first entered this journey is no longer the person who stands here now, which is exactly why the next stage is finally ready to reveal itself. The anxieties that once dictated your choices will gradually lose their authority over you. The uncertainty that once made every step feel complicated will no longer occupy the same space within your mind, and the version of yourself that spent so much time trying to understand why life unfolded the way it did will slowly become a distant memory rather than a current reality. This is not something being taken from you. It is something being transcended. It is the natural progression of a soul that has reached the completion of one chapter and is now prepared to enter another with a greater level of consciousness and self-awareness. What is happening is not the creation of a new identity. In truth, it is something much deeper than that. You are rediscovering the essence that existed before. Disappointment taught you to doubt yourself. Before, fear convinced you to shrink your light. Before, the expectations of others pulled you away from your own inner truth. The greatest transformation is not becoming someone else. The greatest transformation is remembering who you have always been beneath every layer that was placed upon you. And when that remembrance begins awakening fully, it changes the way you see everything. There is a stage in this process that arrives quietly. It does not demand attention. It does not announce itself through dramatic events or overwhelming revelations. Yet it is one of the most significant moments in the entire journey. It is the moment when the turbulence begins settling, the moment when the emotional highs and lows that seemed so intense gradually organize themselves into something stable. For so long, you may have felt as though you were standing in moving water, constantly adjusting your balance, constantly questioning what was coming next. Then suddenly, almost without warning, the movement calms. The uncertainty loses its momentum. The inner noise becomes quieter. What remains is a feeling that is difficult to describe but impossible to mistake. It feels solid, grounded, real. This is the point where the energetic transition completes its anchoring process. The threshold that once appeared somewhere in the distance is no longer ahead of you. You have already crossed it. Many people expect transformation to feel explosive, They imagine dramatic moments that instantly change everything, yet genuine evolution often arrives with remarkable precision. It settles into your consciousness in a way that feels almost effortless. You may notice a profound sense of peace replacing years of internal questioning. You may discover that the constant need for answers begins fading, not because every question has been resolved, but because something deeper within you already understands what your mind has been struggling to grasp. The shift is not chaotic, it is exact. It is as though every piece finally settles into its proper position, and in that moment, something extraordinary happens. You stop searching, not because life has given you every detail of the future, but because your soul recognizes that it has arrived where it needed to be. Even if circumstances around you are still evolving, something inside already knows. That knowing becomes unshakable. Once that internal alignment establishes itself fully, the outer world cannot continue operating in the same way. This is because your reality is not disconnected from your inner condition. What you consistently embody begins influencing what unfolds around you. The energy you carry becomes reflected through experiences, opportunities, relationships, and circumstances. As your internal foundation changes, external life begins reorganizing itself in response. Sometimes these changes appear gradually, other times they arrive with surprising speed. Situations that seem permanently delayed suddenly find resolution. Obstacles that appeared immovable begin shifting. Pathways that once looked closed reveal unexpected openings. What makes this process remarkable is that it often unfolds through a level of ease that feels unfamiliar. Instead of constant struggle, there is flow. Instead of endless forcing, there is cooperation. Instead of resistance at every turn, there is movement. At first this may feel strange because you have become accustomed to measuring progress through effort alone. Yet there exists a deeper intelligence operating beneath visible reality, one that responds not only to action but also to alignment. The more you trust this process, the more naturally life begins unfolding. For a long time, you may have carried the painful feeling that others could not fully see you. Perhaps you felt misunderstood despite your best efforts to communicate. Perhaps you felt that your depth, your sensitivity, or your unique perspective remained unnoticed. There may have been moments when you wondered whether anyone truly recognized the person you were beneath the roles you played. As this new chapter begins emerging, that experience starts changing. Alignment has a way of making people visible, not through performance, not through forcing attention, but through authenticity. When you become fully connected to yourself, your presence naturally carries a different energy. Others begin sensing it. The right individuals are drawn toward it. People who are capable of recognizing your true nature begin appearing with greater frequency. These encounters often feel surprisingly natural. There is less effort involved, less explaining, less trying to prove who you are. Instead, there is recognition, a feeling that someone understands you without requiring endless justification. These connections are not random. They reflect the frequency you are now embodying. They are part of the unfolding alignment, guiding you into your next stage of growth. What makes these relationships different is their ease. There is no constant struggle to be accepted, no exhausting need to convince others of your value. You simply exist as yourself, and that becomes enough. As the momentum continues building, certain opportunities may emerge more rapidly than you expect. Some doors will not spend months slowly opening. They may appear almost suddenly. An invitation, a possibility, a conversation, a circumstance that seems to arrive out of nowhere. What once felt distant may suddenly stand directly before you. This acceleration can feel surprising because the human mind often expects preparation to occur before opportunity arrives. Yet sometimes opportunity is the preparation. Sometimes growth occurs through stepping forward rather than waiting until every uncertainty disappears. This is why trust becomes increasingly important during this stage. These openings are not accidental events appearing without reason. They are responses to everything you have already worked through. They are consequences of the lessons, growth, healing, and perseverance that brought you to this point. Yet there is an important responsibility that accompanies these opportunities. You must be willing to recognize them. Excessive hesitation can cause you to overlook what has been placed directly in front of you. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means remaining present enough to notice when life is offering a path that resonates naturally. Often the things meant for you arrive with an unexpected sense of ease, not because they lack importance, but because they are already aligned with your journey before they become visible. Even as these positive changes unfold, there may still be moments when old patterns attempt to return. A familiar fear may suddenly surface. An old insecurity may whisper from the background of your thoughts. Habits you believed were gone may briefly reappear. This can feel confusing if you interpret it incorrectly. Yet it is not evidence that you are moving backward. It is not proof that the transformation failed. What you are witnessing is simply the remaining echo of a former version of yourself, the residue of old conditioning lingering at the edges of awareness. The difference now is that you can see it clearly. In the past, these patterns operated unconsciously. They influenced decisions without your awareness. They controlled reactions without your permission. Now everything is different. You recognize them as they arise. You observe them instead of becoming them, and within that observation lies a profound form of freedom, because awareness creates choice, and choice creates transformation. Every time you recognize an old pattern without surrendering to it, you strengthen the reality of who you are becoming. Every time you choose alignment instead of fear, trust instead of avoidance, growth instead of repetition, you reinforce the new foundation that is taking shape beneath your life. And that realization becomes the clearest evidence that the journey is no longer about escaping the person you once were, but about consciously choosing the person you are ready to become. Each time you choose alignment over fear, each time you move forward instead of retreating into what feels safe, you strengthen this new version of yourself, until eventually the old patterns lose their hold completely, and what once felt like effort becomes your natural state. At this level, alignment cannot be imitated or forced. It must be embodied because the energy you are stepping into responds only to authenticity. You can no longer pretend to be okay with what drains you. You can no longer ignore what feels wrong. You can no longer settle for environments or relationships that do not match your frequency. This may feel intense at first because it requires honesty at a level you may not have practiced before, but it is also freeing because it removes the need to perform or adapt in ways that disconnect you from yourself. What remains is truth, and from that truth, everything real begins to grow. As everything begins to unfold, there will be a moment, quiet yet powerful, where you look back on everything you have been through and see it differently. Not as random events or isolated struggles, but as a sequence, a pattern, a path that was guiding you toward this exact point. You will begin to connect the moments that once confused you, the delays that once frustrated you, the endings that once hurt you, and you will see how each one redirected you, protected you, or prepared you in ways you could not understand at the time. This realization is not just comforting, it is awakening because it shows you that you were never lost. You are always being led, even in the moments where it felt like nothing was happening at all. You are standing at the threshold now, not approaching it, not searching for it, but standing within reach of it. And what happens next depends on your willingness to step fully into what you have become. This is not about waiting for the perfect moment, because the moment is already here. It is about recognizing that you are ready even if part of you still feels uncertain. The threshold does not require perfection. It requires presence. It requires you to claim your place within this new reality without hesitation. And the moment you do, the moment you stop holding back and allow yourself to step forward completely, everything that has been aligning behind the scenes begins to move towards you with a force that cannot be stopped.